Ubisoft is an extremely successful video game publishing company now riding the joyous joyride of video game quality decline and steadily crashing stock value. But it wasn't always like this. Ubisoft was once respected, but what happened to this company that it reached a state where their legal trouble surrounding sexual misconduct is the longest section of their Wikipedia page? Well, let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, there was a god, of course, and after that came Ubisoft. At the forefront of the company currently as chairman and CEO is Yves Guillemot, one of the several family members who founded the company. Ironically, their beginnings were humble, living in a small village in France by the name of Brittany, no spears. They supported the family biz by helping with accounting and logistics, but the business was sinking harder than their recent reputation. Where once upon a time they used to sell chemicals to farmers, probably crack. They then began selling computers and gaming software. As business was booming, the five Guillemot brothers founded Ubisoft in 1986 to create games in an industry that at the time was going crazy. No taxi. But hold up. Wait a minute. Before they were Ubisoft, there used to be a gap in the middle of the name, that's why I keep saying it like that. They created Guillemot Informatique in 1984. They were doing good, making millions by the year after the creation, but they wanted one thing. They wanted to get into the development side of games, seeing that they already knew about publishing and distribution of video games. But why go into development? Because that's how they then started Ubisoft. The name is allegedly supposed to mean ubiquitous software, meaning that you can find it everywhere. A bit cocky, if you ask me, but okay. Now, this is where things actually began. They started developing games out of a chateau, which is a French fancy word for palace, in the hopes that it would attract video game developers due to the location. I couldn't find a picture of the actual castle they started out from, so here's a pretty castle instead. You're welcome. The same year they founded Ubisoft Entertainment, they made all kinds of games. You might have even heard of them. Who could forget Zombie with an I, or If You're Happy and You Know It, Scene a Clap, and Fer et Flamme. By 1988, they had already employed about 6 different people, one of them being the man, the myth, and the legend, Michel Ancel. If you don't know him, well, I don't know. Have you ever heard of Rayman, Rabbids, and Beyond Good and Evil? He's the man behind all of them. At some point, keeping the exotic chateau was too expensive for Ubisoft, so they moved the offices to Paris, but that meant young Ancel could not afford to work with the company anymore, so he left. But that's until 1994. Ancel returned with a prototype project he wanted to show the big boys over at Ubisoft. The project was so promising that Michel Guillemot opened a new studio with 100 people dedicated to get this shit done. The project was released in 1995 for the Atari Jaguar and PlayStation, and its name, ladies and gentlemen, was Rayman. If you thought things were booming before, this is where money started pouring in like they were Scrooge McDuck. Rayman 1 was Ubisoft's first major success, becoming the best-selling game for the PlayStation 1 in the UK alone at 900,000 copies, which is bonkers. Now, we had this game in our household, but this game was acquired by my family when I was -2 years old, so I was legit not even a plan, and little did my sister know that me, the little shit younger brother, was coming in about 2 years' time. But that's not the point. This game was hard. Even in today's Reddit forums, people are wondering, is it just me or is the first Rayman game ridiculously difficult? It's the game. The game is very hard. Rayman 1 was the Souls game before the Souls games type beat. Why is this relevant? Well, everyone in my family enjoys video games, to a certain degree, except for my mom. And this is because when I was very young, my mom's first experience with video games was Rayman 1. Safe to say, my mom has never touched another controller since. Rest in peace to the gamer mom I could have had. After the very big success of Rayman 1, it was time to go Mr. Worldwide. At this point, they started making distribution deals with all sorts of companies, mainly, I don't know, maybe you've heard of EA. And after that, in 1996, big boys Ubisoft started opening up studios all over the world. I mean, I'm talking Milan, Montreal, Annecy, and Shanghai. But there was one big market missing from their very strong and success-hungry grip. They were yet to set foot in the US of A. Now, they were very strategic about all of this because their timing was great. With the rise of internet use in 1999, they decided to create several more studios dedicated to online free-to-play games. One of those studios was Gameloft, which brought a lot of cash money into the company, around $170 million to be exact. What resulted of this? Well, this allowed Ubisoft to buy Red Storm Entertainment in 2000, giving them access to one of the most popular video game series to date. But it doesn't stop there, boys and girls. Obviously, after getting their hands on the series, they continued expanding on Tom Clancy's games, eventually releasing the ever-famous Rainbow Six series. Now, in the 21st century, alongside TinySoft, they worked to develop the new big Tom Clancy game, Splinter Cell, in the hopes that it would rival Sony's PlayStation Metal Gear Solid, which, to be fair, went on to do extremely well, selling 9.4 million copies as a series by 2004. But on another front, Ubisoft also bought other companies which brought other IPs under their control, slowly building their arsenal of IPs, placing a stronger presence within the industry. Another of the IPs that ended up under their belt was the legendary series Prince of Persia. This part of the video actually really excites me because the Prince of Persia series is one of those games that brings a tear to my eye, laughter to my joy, and it made a man out of this young boy. Bars. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time came out in 2003, which made me 6 years old at the time. Since I had the delayed mental capacity and motor function of a toddler, I could not for the life of me beat the game, but maybe just about get through the beginning section. The majority of the time, I have the distinct memory of watching my older sister play the game on Sunday afternoons, while me and my mum were sitting on the same couch, and while my mum is reading a book, or probably sleeping, I was eating a copious amount of biscuits, which to this day, the taste of those biscuits is a strong and yet faint memory in my taste buds. I love it. Before I start crying over old and cherished memories, let's talk about logos. Well, like a child going through puberty and existential dread and becoming self-aware about your appearance and struggling with self-esteem, just me? Well, what I'm trying to get at is that Ubisoft actually ended up changing its look over the years. In its inception, rocking that good old GTA Vice City 80s look. I like it. Very fancy. Eventually turning into a boring standard Times New Roman type shit in 1989, turning into whatever the hell this is in 1993, and then changing it again in 94 into Ubisoft Entertainment, and finally in 2003 all the way until now, the McFlurry swirl we've grown to love and hate. And curiously, there is speculation that if the recent Ubisoft logo is a top-down view, the front view would actually be a poop, which I found mildly amusing. The mid to late 2000s were a time of immense success for Ubisoft, but also filled with stress. During this period, they released a great amount of games that became a huge success. Games like Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, Far Cry 1, Assassin's Creed, but most importantly, who could forget Winnie the Pooh's Rumbly Tumbly Adventure? But on another note, EA did a bit of swiper, no swiping move on Ubisoft. Since Ubisoft had gone public in 1996, EA decided to buy 19.9% stake in the company, seen as a hostile takeover on part from Ubisoft. This would not be the first or last time Ubisoft would go through this. Later on, in the mid-2010s, Vivendi Games did the exact same thing by buying around 17% of the stock value of Ubisoft. Luckily for Ubisoft, both Vivendi and EA sold their shares of the company, so for now, Ubisoft was safe. Well, kinda. The story doesn't end there. Although Ubisoft had seen mostly great success at this point, around 2012 is when things started to go a little bit poopy. Do you remember this? This was Uplay, also known as a piece of shit platform that Ubisoft introduced for all of their games at the time. Why was Uplay hated though? Lots of reasons, but here's a short list. Number 1, DRM. Don't get it confused with Dr. Mario. DRM means Digital Rights Management, which is basically a service to protect digital copyrighted material, in this case, video games. The problem with this was that all of Ubisoft's games, even single-player ones, were requiring constant internet connection to be played. But if your internet was a bit like this, it would stop the game completely and make you lose progress. Number 2, Uplay was required even if you bought games from Steam, meaning that you now needed 2 platforms in order to run one game, one of which was completely unnecessary and viewed by many, including myself, as a poopy stain in the gaming sphere. Since then, Uplay has become Ubisoft Connect, which is essentially trying to be a combination of Steam, the Xbox Game Pass, an achievement system, and PlayStation's trophies. But no one gives 2 craps about it because, well, kind of just because. But anyways, despite the 2010s being the beginning of a few of Ubisoft's failures and controversies, the company still met a lot of success during this time. 9 Assassin's Creed games released during this time, ranging from the remaining 2 games of Ezio Trilogy all the way to the Assassin's Creed Odyssey, in which they revamped the gameplay formula, transitioning from the classic gameplay introduced in the first title to a more RPG approach, which some loved, some hated, and a few select group of people said, "We don't care." I honestly enjoyed them until the moment where Ubisoft released Valhalla, which although reviews are leaning positive on Steam, I don't have to write a Reddit thread like this in order to let you know that Valhalla doesn't feel like an AC game. But there were other franchises that had their catalyst moment around this point. One game that I loved was Far Cry 3. Although I haven't played it in a long ass time, it introduced 2 things that I loved. First, a crazy guy but iconic man as the antagonist, and 2, a beautiful island to explore which kinda introduced fun filler content which at the time wasn't really the status quo, and 3, this game awakened things in me that my prepubescent brain was not aware existed. If you know, you know. Although there are more franchises I could go in more detail in, a few select ones that were massively successful as well were Watch Dogs and Rainbow Six Siege. Watch Dogs being another single-player type game, and Rainbow Six Siege becoming the most popular FPS online game Ubisoft has made to date, although they did try with X-Defiant, which I gotta say I did like, but it can't compete with the likes of COD. But towards the later years of the 2010s, the little glimpses of Ubisoft's failures slowly started snowballing into catastrophic issues that would only become more and more significant with time and would only be accompanied with other competitors facing the same sort of issues. Like these guys. If you ever want to be compared to anyone, it's never these two. When it came to Ubisoft games, they started becoming as stale as the bread I bought last week because I forgot I had it. Although you could say that they found a formula for success in their games, they not only started becoming similar to each other within their own franchises, having very little deviation from one title to another, their similarities started bleeding from franchise to franchise. For example, in Assassin's Creed you climb towers to unlock larger areas of the map and the secrets and collectibles within it. What do you do in Far Cry? You climb radio towers to unlock a larger area of the map exactly the same way to achieve the same goal. Then within Watch Dogs and Far Cry, in both of these games you can attack enemy bases in order to take control of that particular area. Another of their issues was imitation. Even with some of their more popular and respected franchises, for example Splinter Cell, the success of other games by other companies like Activision's Call of Duty dramatically transformed the approach Ubisoft had in their Splinter Cell games. Going from a stealth-based game loved by many to the likes of Metal Gear Solid, Ubisoft then Mr. Mimed the shit out of COD and made Splinter Cell much closer to a third-person shooter instead, and eventually also made X-Defiant, which was supposed to be COD in its glory days. But how did Ubisoft go from a respected and revolutionary company who delivered good and unforgettable experiences and just became overall despised? I think it's a combo of these. 1. Yearly releases lacking in creativity and delivering reskinned experiences. 2. Increasingly shameful monetization practices like selling skins in a single-player video game. 3. Games that flat out did not work on release. And 4. Very little to no new IPs. Obviously there's the whole sexual misconduct bit, but we'll get to that in a minute. From a gaming perspective, it's sad to see old franchises die out like Prince of Persia that meant so much to me as a kid. It has become a footnote in Ubisoft's history of games and turned into a franchise that is used to make subpar platformers and remakes of its former games. I do want to take a moment to praise the artists involved with the company and their games. They still succeed in making beautiful looking and sounding games, becoming truly iconic. It's only sad that their work is used in such now mediocre products. But let's talk about something more positive. So there was a bunch of sexual misconduct allegations, mostly sparked by the rise in popularity of the Me Too movement, and it affected everyone in the company, from the bottom ranks to the guys over at the top of the ivory tower. It resulted in people getting fired, being placed on disciplinary leave for being bad, but not bad enough to stop them getting paid, just move them around the company so that people would forget what they did. And lastly, just overall people choosing to quit before things got too bad. For themselves, that is. There's so much I could talk about on this, but I'll pick a few bullet points. For example, 1. Apparently a lot of complaints in regards to sexual misconduct were made throughout the years to the HR team at Ubisoft, but they were disregarded, if not completely ignored, and also not even registered. This, of course, after getting to a point where it was impossible to ignore, resulted in the heads of HR and editorial actually getting fired. Number 2, this doesn't really pertain to sexual misconduct per se, but it still kind of associates. But upon Ubisoft being criticized for failing to support female player models in some of their more popular games, they used the excuse that women were more difficult to animate, despite the fact that they hadn't done it before in other games, which were older than the ones they were developing now, with better engines. What? And number 3, after Activision got sued by the state of California due to their hostile workplace, also involving sexual misconduct, and let's not forget the stolen breast milk from the communal fridge, 500 Ubisoft employees signed a letter in solidarity to what Activision's employees had gone through. This would be more of a sign to upper management at Ubisoft that people were not happy, so unhappy that there was essentially a mass exodus of employees quitting in 2021. I could keep going, but you get the idea. People were overworked, the environment was hostile, and nothing good can come from a place like this. So where are we now? Well, AC Shadows trailer and gameplay reveals came out, which is set in Japan, and to a lot of people was a highly awaited setting for an Assassin's Creed title, including myself. So what's the problem now? One of the game's protagonists is a man who is portrayed as a samurai but is a footnote in the history of Japan. Oh, and he's black. The fact that he's black is not the issue people have. Well, maybe some do, but we don't really care about those. The main issue is that Ubisoft had a plethora of historical figures that they could have chosen to have as a protagonist, but they chose a man who, although existed, is barely recorded in history and was not that important to begin with, besides the fact that he served some notable people. The speculation comes from the fact that Ubisoft decided to go with this dual protagonist approach of Yasuke as the black samurai and Noe, a woman shinobi, for inclusion and diversity purposes rather than making their game's characters actually fit the setting itself. The game also got delayed from November of this year until February of 2025 after a lot of backlash from the public due to the failure of Star Wars Outlaws, which barely scraped past 1 million sold units, which is really poor for a Star Wars licensed title. Ubisoft, after years of doing this, finally learned that customers will no longer stand for half-assed, buggy, and mediocre shit that costs $70 to $100 depending on which version you get, which resulted in the delay of AC Shadows, the reason being to polish and refine the experience. And lastly, one of the more important reasons as to why Assassin's Creed Shadows had such backlash was due to a highly concerning historical inaccuracies on their part, which will be addressed within this extended window of time of 4 months until release. My concern is that, at this point, there's a ton of workers and developers crunching hard behind the scenes to fix this game after the huge amount of pressure put on them from investors, shareholders, and overall senior leadership to crank out these games on a yearly basis. And lastly, Ubisoft may be getting bought by Tencent. Tencent already owns 9% of the company and is reportedly considering to purchase a significant stake in the company. This could be either a good or a bad thing, no one can know for sure. On one hand, sometimes a change of ownership comes with a breath of fresh air, but on the other hand, it can mean that serious downfall of a company and loss of its initial identity. And that's where we're at. Ubisoft has had its fair share of successes and as of late a lot of failures, but only the future can tell where it will all end. But before you go, if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like this one too. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe and do all of that. Thank you.